there's going to be a primary. That should not be shocking to anyone, simply because there's virtually always a primary in the races. And
Ohio's gubernatorial election isn't until next fall, but the race is already heating up. We will talk with the Republican who wants Governor DeWine out of the State House.
I ran against Governor DeWine, Mike DeWine at that time, candidate DeWine, because I didn't think he was the person to do it. 3.5 years later, I found that to be true. Look at where our state is today.
And what his candidacy could reveal about the GOP. And she's been invited to the State House several times to speak about COVID-19. The debunked claims this doctor shared with the legislature that got the country talking. And later,
it's right. Yeah, it's always somebody else.
We like to call him Millionaire Mark. The conversation he had with his wife about all of that Vax-A-Million cash. Face the State begins now. The race for governor of Ohio is shaping up. Governor Mike DeWine has his first major contender. It's Jim Renacci, a former U.S. congressman and a former opponent. As for the Democrats, Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley is the first major candidate to throw her hat into the ring. Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Tracy Townsend. If the 2020 presidential election revealed anything about Ohio politics, it's this. Ohio voters are skewing Republican, or at the very least, they supported the former president. 53% of voters voted for former President Trump. 45% voted for current President Joe Biden. But who will Ohio Republicans support at the State House? One Quinnipiac poll last year showed DeWine had a higher rating among Democrats than Republicans. Former U.S. Congressman Jim Renacci sees that as an opportunity.
The governor will say, well, COVID took all of his energy. The truth of it is, it didn't have to be a binary choice. When you're governor, you got to worry about everything. Yes, COVID, but you got to work about businesses, employment. And I think his draconian ways of handling the COVID crisis really put our state in jeopardy and caused many more problems than it should have.
Renacci has been critical of Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley and her efforts on gun control. He says mental health should be addressed before guns are taken away. If elected, he says he will take a close look at the budget. Renacci claims the state is spending too much on higher education and Medicare. Governor DeWine, meantime, says a primary challenge isn't unexpected.
I'll be laying out my vision for the future of the state of Ohio as we move forward. And but I don't think anyone has had more press conferences, been out more than I have, and we're now trying to put this pandemic in the rearview mirror, and Ohio is coming out strong, and I feel good, very, very good, frankly, with where we are. We made tough decisions early on. We cut spending. We froze hiring.
You might recall Renacci fell short in his bid for the U.S. Senate back in 2018. He lost to incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown. Add Ohio to the growing list of states where Republicans are proposing a rewrite of state election laws, including banning the placement of ballot drop boxes anywhere except the local elections office, cutting out day of early voting, and tightening voter ID rules. Supporters say it's all about integrity. Opponents call those kinds of changes voter suppression, and more grassroots groups are working to push back on proposed changes. Among them, a nonpartisan organization called Secure Democracy, working to protect the tradition of in-person voting. I talked with the executive director, Sarah Walker. She told me that the priority is voter experience over political party or politician.
And so regardless of who's in charge, we don't align ourselves with Republicans or Democrats. We align ourselves with the voters' experience.
How significant is that when we think about where we are at this time in our nation's history with, some people thinking the election results were rigged and there's a whole thing going on in Congress, and the right to vote.
I think, unfortunately, the 2020 elections were a catalyst for distrust in our election system across the country. And after Election Day, Americans waited not only days, but sometimes weeks, and in some cases, even months before some elections results were finalized. And what we're working to do is restore faith in the integrity of our elections and simultaneously improve the strength and efficiency of our elections administration in a common sense way that can actually modernize elections and not sacrifice access.
Walker points to the long lines back in November, socially distanced as voters showed up in droves during the pandemic, as an access issue because in Ohio, there can only be one in-person voting location per county.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And one location just isn't enough. You should be able to meet the needs. We should trust our local elections officials to be able to decide if you live in a more populous county or more rural county. If you live in a rural county, perhaps you don't want someone having to drive all the way across the state, across the county to have to vote. So maybe you need two. But if you live in a more populous county, are you really meeting the needs of just one center?
Secure Democracy is also advocating for online voter registration. Walker told me that it could create an equal playing field for everyone to have equal access across the board.
It also centralizes the system and creates a uniform way to apply. But in this day and age, people should be able to log onto their computer and register. It doesn't mean that you won't have to demonstrate that you are a voter, an eligible voter, but it does mean that people will be able to register in a way that makes sense.
Secure Democracy advocates plan to lobby lawmakers about issues including restoring voter eligibility to Americans who have returned home from prison, ballot tracking, and what are called cure processes that are uniform and allow all voters to fix those small, honest mistakes so that their votes can be counted. The campaign to lead the state's high court is ramping up, with newly elected Justice Jennifer Brunner announcing she's running for Chief Justice. Brunner was elected to the Ohio Supreme Court last November. She says that when she was campaigning, she also took note of the protests over the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. Both, in her opinion, signal an opportunity to identify and set the stage for changes in the criminal justice system in our state.
There are ways that I can do that as an associate justice, but as Chief Justice, you can sort of help set the direction for the court, and you're in a leadership position to be able to bring people, not just from the criminal justice system, but from the public, from other areas of government, together to try to solve systemic problems like that. And I was so impressed with where the court is in terms of its administrative efficiency and function, and I credit Chief Justice O'Connor for that. And this would be a situation where, unlike when I walked into the Secretary of State's office, I would not have to do a lot of putting the operation back together. It's in a very strong position now where it would be an excellent springboard to go beyond what the chief's done in terms of bail reform, eliminating sort of the debtor prison concept, and looking at things that are baked into our criminal justice system that we may not even recognize, that are sort of a vestige of that slavery mentality that's been with our country for 150 years or more.
I was doing some reading. You said that Chief Justice role would give you an expanded platform to strengthen the rule of law and direct the focus of Ohio's courts to provide fairness, equality, and respect for all Ohioans.
Correct.
How does that, do you have an idea of how voters would see that?
Well, I think one thing voters look at with the court system and with justice is fairness. And they also want to be treated with respect, whether they're in there for viewing a trial, whether they're a defendant in a criminal case, whether they're a litigant in a civil case. They want to be treated with respect. There's compassion shown that way, but I think there's also some loyalty that's built in and trust that's built in for the people who are in the process. And the equality piece is just fundamental.
Justice Brunner is a former Secretary of State, a former Franklin County and 10th District Court of Appeals judge. Chief Justice O'Connor's term ends December of 2022. The Ohio Republican Party chair says, quote, "It is hard to fathom why a justice who was elected just over 6 months ago and has not yet written a majority opinion would ask to be promoted to Chief Justice. Debunked claims on the State House floor. Who made the invite? And the House Speaker is asked, should there be limits on guests?
Opened up the door and said, well, I recognize you, and shook his hand, and he said, well, congratulations, you just won $1 million.
And a little later, one of this week's Vax-A-Million winners is one of our neighbors in Central Ohio. But first, let's say you work from home in a city different than your workplace. Who should collect your income tax? The legislation that some leaders say jeopardizes safety. Working from home became pretty typical during the pandemic. Pew Research found at one point 71% of Americans were doing it in 2020. That's why Governor Mike DeWine signed House Bill 197. It says income taxes will be collected by the municipality where your employer is located, not the city or village where you live. Well, now state lawmakers want to repeal that and allow municipalities to collect income taxes based on your home, not the municipality where you work. Lawmakers want to make this retroactive for last year as well. 10 TV's Lacey Crisp explains why some city leaders are fired up.
In major cities across Ohio, like Columbus, about 50% of the people who work in the city also live here. And with so many people working remotely in the last year, lawmakers are considering sending your income tax dollars home.
You can't put your car in drive and reverse at the same time.
Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther says he's focused on the economic recovery of the city moving forward. Nearly 80% of the city's revenue comes from income taxes. The city has already passed a budget for the year, but if a bill proposed by state lawmakers is passed, it means if you're working from home and you live in a different city than your office, your tax dollars will go to the city where you live, and it could be retroactive.
You can't really change the rules of the game and the laws in place after a period of time has already taken place.
With much of the budget going towards salaries, cities could be forced to lay off frontline workers.
I can say with 100% certainty those conversations will be had should this legislation go through. We will be looking at longer response times. And we could potentially be looking at layoffs.
And it's not just bigger cities that will be impacted. It could mean a loss of millions to cities like Dublin, population 50,000. The mayor there predicts it could mean a loss of $25 to $35 million every year.
This is not something that we can just replicate. And it's going to have a profound impact on what we can do for the region.
And could also put into question agreements made between cities and businesses to bring jobs to the area.
So we have in excess of 20 economic development agreements. And in those economic development agreements, we revenue share with our businesses.
While he would not go on camera, Bill co-author Republican Chris Jordan from Powell said in a statement, House Bill 157 is a common sense tax reform measure that will protect Ohio taxpayers. It is based upon the simple principle that Ohio taxpayers should not be taxed by municipalities where they do not perform work in nor live in.
And we reached out to several lawmakers. Many declined to comment. In Columbus, Lacey Crisp, 10 TV News.
The Ohio Mayors Alliance says our mayors have made it clear that this provision will be detrimental to the fiscal health of their local communities and to the economic recovery of our state. Republican and Democratic lawmakers are making their case for kicking House Speaker Larry Householder out of office. Householder is accused of taking money from utilities and special interest groups in exchange for using his power as House Speaker to pass House Bill 6. That's the energy bill that bailed out 2 nuclear power plants formerly owned by First Energy. 2 resolutions exist in the House to expel the Speaker, and both were heard in committee this week. Householder will have a chance to testify before the committee during the next hearing. School's out for summer, but school budget talk continues. Current Ohio House Speaker Bob Cupp is reiterating his support for the House plan as part of the state's upcoming 2-year, $75 billion budget. Speaker Cupp says what's called the Fair School Funding Plan is a historic opportunity to do something important for quality education in Ohio. The Senate apparently sees it differently and replaced the plan with its own funding proposal. This all needs to be reconciled by the end of the month. There are questions this morning about who should be allowed to speak at the State House. This week, Sherry Tenpenny testified. She's a doctor from Cuyahoga County, and she spoke during a hearing on House Bill 248. It would crack down on vaccine requirements. At one point, she claimed people who get the vaccine are magnetized. Those claims reached the Washington Post, the Daily Beast, and CNN. And those claims are, of course, false. Here's Franklin County Public Health Commissioner Joe Mazzola.
I haven't heard that claim. Well, all I can tell you is, and for our residents, and is that these vaccines are safe. They have been tested. They have clinically, not only in the clinical setting, but now we have literally hundreds of millions of residents across our country have been vaccinated.
The CDC posted this bulletin saying, no, receiving a COVID-19 vaccine will not make you magnetic. The speaker was invited by lawmakers, and Thursday, House Speaker Bob Cupp defended the decision to give them a platform. He said in part, those kinds of things are aberrations. Most of the people who come to testify provide very valuable information to the committee as they deliberate on proposed legislation. Nearly 200 nursing homes across the state were cited for failing to control the spread of COVID-19, and 10 investigators has found they later got bonus payments from the federal government worth millions. This news doesn't sit well for the people who have lost loved ones or a nursing home watchdog. That group says the payments fail to hold these facilities accountable. Here's Chief Investigative Reporter Bennett Haverly.
And, when you put somebody in a facility like that, you're expecting to, be provided good care.
Stephen Short described his late uncle as a businessman who gave back. Harry Robert Evans is also one of more than 7,500 long-term care residents in Ohio who died after contracting COVID-19. His death in August came during a stay at Newark Care and Rehabilitation. An outbreak here led to Stephen's outrage.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was a good man. And after him, he's the after his death, I have my mother left on that side, and that's it. So, so it's a hard thing.
It's not entirely clear who infected the 85-year-old, but the facility was later cited by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services for inadequate infection control. During an August survey, health inspectors wrote that based on CDC guidance, the facility failed to perform adequate contact tracing to properly identify, quarantine, and appropriately test all residents with known exposure to a staff member who tested positive for COVID-19. Inspectors also noted that the facility's failure likely contributed to the COVID-19 outbreak that spread throughout the facility, infecting 71 residents, resulting in 20 deaths. CMS hit Newark Care and Rehab with a $459,000 civil monetary penalty. But in the months that followed, the federal government also awarded that same facility another $153,000 in incentive payments when COVID cases went down.
It's unbelievable because, how does the federal government, incentivize somebody like that and help them out?
It didn't just happen here. This facility and this one, all of which were cited for infection control issues, later got bonus payments from the federal government as part of a $2 billion portion of the CARES Act. The monies were rewarded to nursing homes and long-term care facilities that showed improvement in cases and infections during a given month, regardless of what happened in previous months. In fact, 10 investigators found of the 247 facilities in Ohio cited for infection control issues, 195 of them also got these bonus incentive payments. And in 80% of those cases, the amount of money from the bonus payments completely covered the cost of the civil monetary penalties.
Really, those monies are from us. These are taxpayer subsidized dollars. They are being given right back to the nursing homes.
Brian Lee is a former nursing home regulator who now runs a patient advocacy nonprofit. He says the federal government's incentive payments fail to hold these facilities to account for their missteps.
If you take a deep breath and smell dead bodies are piling up in those other waves of outbreaks, it's like the feds just neglected all of that and had the blinders on just to look at what was going good at a good period.
But a spokesman for the Ohio Healthcare Association, which represents 1,100 long-term care providers, acknowledged the payments weren't based on past issues.
It's not looking at, did you improve your infection control practices, at least not directly.
Mm-hmm. But the optics of all of this just seems goofy to some people at home, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's been pointed out.
I've left several messages.
Newark Care and Rehab hasn't returned our repeated calls seeking comment, and a former administrator declined to be interviewed. We did hear from Country Court in Mount Vernon and Otterbein at Gahanna, both of which received infection control fines and bonus payments. They each sent us separate statements that included very similar phrases, including this one, quote, "Survey history and or receipt of isolated deficiencies that may have occurred should not be the basis for denying critical resources for any provider or nursing home resident. But for family members like Stephen, still grieving a loss, he disagrees."
Nothing's going to bring him back, but, you know, again, when you blatantly do things that cause people to lose their lives, you shouldn't receive anything.
Bennett Haberly, 10 Investigates.
To search which nursing homes get incentive payments and fines in your area, look for this story at our website, 10tv.com. You know, there is a good chance a Union County man is having a pretty good weekend. It's his first as a millionaire. Why he says he's not sharing with his wife.
Mark Klein from Richwood, you just won $1 million in the Vax-A-Million giveaway. Congratulations to you.
On Wednesday, Central Ohio had its first winner in the Vax-A-Million drawing. Mark Klein from the town of Richwood in Union County took home the prize. He tells us he was watching 10 TV when Governor DeWine showed up to break the news. 10 TV's Angela Reichert takes it from there.
We just have a, you know, just the word's starting to spread.
Mark Klein can't believe it.
So who wins, right? You know, it's always somebody else. I never expected I would win.
Especially not like this. He was home watching TV, and then he hears the doorbell.
My wife looked on the ring cam and said, "There's some guys out there in suits."
And not just any guy, this guy, Governor Mike DeWine.
I opened up the door and said, "Well, I recognize you," and shook his hand, and he said, "Well, congratulations, you just won $1 million." And I opened up the door and yelled into my wife and told her, "Hey, we won $1 million." And then I kind of thought about it a second and I said, "No, I won $1 million because you didn't register."
Any idea what you're going to do with all that money?
Well, my family's already making plans for a beach vacation, but, you know, just help out family. I'm retired, so, you know, it's not like I'm dying for money, but it certainly is a you know, life changer to you know, win a nice amount of money like that, and, you know, can help others that, you know, kind of need something.
And while that money changes a lot, it hasn't changed his mind on this.
I think it's real important that everybody gets the vaccine. You know, everybody that doubts it, it was no big deal. 2 little pinches and you were done. I've hurt myself more doing things around the house than what the vaccine did.
Reporting in Union County, Angela Reichert, 10 TV News.
Congratulations to him. Mark Jones says he's not sharing with his wife because, as you heard, she didn't sign up for the program, but he's a for better or for worse guy, for richer or poor guy, I'm sure. Thank you all for being here with us today. Remember, if it affects you, your family, and Ohio, we are here to make sure those accountable face the state.